financing your next billion. Gain insights into successful engagements with venture capitalists and investors. Get ahead of industry trends, hear from industry leaders, influencers, founders, policymakers, and governments. Stay in the know on how to finance your next billion.
Well, hello, and welcome once again to Financing Your Next Billion Talks. I'm your host, Yvonne Gamble, and I'm also the Executive Director for Women Leading Change Now. We are now well within the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, and this is our 69th convening. Our topic this year is on the Beijing Accords, where we are actually taking a look at since 1994 when that came on board, and we brought out what those goals were going to be and what we wanted to accomplish for women by 2030. So we are stopping here 2025 and taking a look, and we're going around the world. My guest, no less, is she's from Los Angeles, California, and we're going to hear from Lisa Kirkwood and get her perspective on what she is doing and what her organization, has done and what they're going to do going forward. She's a speaker, author, and consultant. And what she does is she actually works on transforming people through storytelling. So, as you know, I do not steal anyone's thunder. I like them to thunder onto the scene themselves. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, and she's going to tell us all that she needs and wants us to understand about how you transform people through storytelling. Lisa?
Thank you, Yvonne, for the introduction. Thanks for having me today. It's a pleasure to be on your show. And I like to think that my work is it's a contributing factor to women's leadership and empowerment in however small measure that is to start, because this is a process with ripple effects. And women's leadership and empowerment is, I think, at this point, an unstoppable phenomenon. Not everyone is comfortable with it, including women themselves, but it is high time that these changes happen, because we have a troubled history. Us as a human species on this planet, we have a troubled history, and we have conflicts after conflicts and wars after wars, and there is a common denominator. There are no women driving these forces. And that's not to say that masculinity is a bad concept. It's just the toxic masculinity that has driven this type of aggressiveness. Now, when you talk about women's role in society, I was talking just a few years ago with a very smart gentleman who expressed his own personal opinion on women's empowerment. Said, yeah, well, for the past 100 years, when women started to vote, I haven't seen anything significant really from the part of women, because he actually expected something with the thunder, something noisy, something with the flame, with the explosion, and that's not what women are about. The leadership of women happened gradually, slowly, but it's very significant, because when you see women leaders in power, you're talking about VIPs at the very top, prime ministers, presidents. Just look at the social climate of that country. That's not to say that there cannot be exceptions depending on the, say, prior political heritage of that female leader. But look at the trends. We are looking at trends and how women leaders behave differently than their male counterparts. Because for all intents and purposes, even with the progress that women have made over the past so many decades, by the way, Women's International Day, March 8th, has only been celebrated officially globally over the past 4 decades. So we have a few thousands of years of history of unacknowledged women. even though women have been making a tremendous contribution to society in general, first and foremost, because they are the life givers. So we have women now in leadership roles, and we are gradually accepting the notion that women's leadership is different than what we were used to in history. And nonetheless, at this time, as we speak, women are still the world's largest minority. What I mean by that is a minoritized category, even though numerically there are more women than men in the world, but they don't enjoy the same privileges as men, especially when it comes to finances and paying gaps. This is something that the workforce environment has been trying to address in many countries around the world, but this is still a work in progress. And this is just one example. So this is where we are right now. There's a lot of opportunity for progress and improvement, but we are, let's say, in a better spot than we were, say, 50 years ago. So there's only going forward. Thank you.
In keeping with what you were just saying, and I hear this all the time, that the women are in a minority, and many times that comes from what you are counting. And so therefore, is that something that we should really be advocating for, to say that it's one thing to count, say, the number of women in the workforce, that can be, let's say, only 60% or only 30% or 30 or 40% and 60% men in the workforce. But then also say that, but there are 150% women in that particular locale or that country. Do you think that's something that we should be advocating for, or women not necessarily advocating for, but women should just simply start speaking and putting those numbers out there, that true number of just how many women there are?
Yes, and I think it depends a lot of the locale, as you mentioned, because um, numbers, there is strength in numbers, but you wanna aim for women in leadership, not just majority in numbers, but with decision power, decision makers. For example, in the 90s, we had the devastating war in Eastern Europe, in former Yugoslavia. And what used to be a federation of 6 or 7 different regions under one country, they started fighting each other. And to this day, some of those places, the male population of those countries is way below women average. There's one man for like 7 women or something like that, at least one of the statistics that I've seen, which is a sad story, a bad picture to paint, but this is reality because men got decimated. So it's not only numbers that we need to focus on. We need to focus on women's empowerment and how can they step up on the ladder and make decisions. And to that end, I've identified personally 3 main factors that can help women advance their personal career and their roles in society. One of them is education. Think about rural communities, remote parts of the world, where even feeding one's family is a struggle. How can those young girls create career for themselves and even set goals when the main concern is what you're going to eat from one day to another? So that has to be, if basic needs are not met, food, clothing, shelter, is extremely difficult to promote women's agenda, advancement, leadership, empowerment. But say in one community, lucky enough, the basic necessities are met. However, there is not much education. So women, if they're not educated from a young age, that there's more to aim for in life than just set up a family and pour out as many kids as the body allows, that's still not enough progress, not a whole lot. So education is paramount for a woman's image, self-image, self-esteem, and self-improvement. For example, I was born and raised in Romania, and I was just watching a recent statistic. Romania has now the lowest birth rate in 100 years. And I'm like, amen and hallelujah, because this is why the education standard in Europe and especially in Romania, especially for women, is very, very high. So they became career oriented and they are pursuing their dreams and their goals, contrary to what the traditional quote unquote structure of the family used to be. And to me, this is a really huge sign of progress. When people freak out about low birth rates, I'm like, folks, chill. Don't you know that we have AI now? Who do you think is going to do these jobs that a lot of people are doing now? This is a matter of practicality. We need to exercise birth control and only welcome in the people that we can care for. Because how many of the newborn and the existing people on the planet don't have their basic necessities met because they were conceived, received, and raised in improper conditions. So there's a very direct correlation between the level of education of a woman and her social status. The second factor is ownership of finances. If all she is a wife and a mother, and she depends on her husband's salary to buy a new dress, there's not much progress there either. Because a woman without a sense of property, a sense of ownership of her finances, she can't make significant decisions. She's gonna decide what we're gonna have for dinner and where to go out for the restaurant, but that's about it. And this is not progress. This is not good. A woman who has a job, who has a source of income, who has education, and incidentally, she may not be a mother to have to worry about providing for X number of children and spreading thin already maybe scarce resources, then we have a completely different picture. And with these two, education and finances, that
What happens when a group of the world's greatest minds gifted with wealth beyond our imagination buys a sprawling waterfront property in Toronto? They make plans for a $14.3 billion futuristic city, that's what. Sidewalk Labs released its master innovation and development plans to turn a chunk of Toronto's Lake Ontario shoreline into the most futuristic city in the world. It would result in over 93,000 jobs and a better standard of living for its residents. And today, we're going to take a peek inside. Welcome back to our channel. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a video from us. Google X Sidewalk Smart City.
the third main factor, which is social status. How is she defined to herself and to society? Is she an independent woman? Is she self-sufficient? Or is she codependent or dependent? As a wife and mother, which a lot of women are only that, wife and mother, there's not a whole lot of change that you can bring to society. Well, heck, you can bring change to your own status and even your own family because you all depend on one breadwinner, the man, the house. And it is so, this concept is so ingrained in the Latino culture. It's called machismo. So the man has to be all and do all and provide all. Okay, fine. So far, so good. The idea, it's okay if it works. But throughout history, we had an incredible amount of people who were below poverty level because you had only one breadwinner. You had perfectly able bodies of women, educated enough, smart enough, even if they couldn't read or write, they were smart enough to lead life, but they were not given the chance to make decisions. So the poverty level was extremely high because if the man could not provide, would not provide, maybe he was a power drinker or he went to spend money of the family for other women or whatever, just to escape from the stress. By the way, this brings a tremendous amount of stress to the man who has to carry all this burden by himself. It's a very toxic social model that has been imposed upon men, and they had to deal with that and live with it, and the consequences were not good. If he cannot, would not, or does not bring enough, everybody's in trouble. Now, with the advent of women's education, women's rights, and self-made women millionaires and billionaires, that problem has all but disappeared. Because There's no need for scarcity anymore. The resources are distributed differently, and women with decision power, they have other priorities. Think about Oprah. At some point, she was the world's first Black woman billionaire, and she's fine to this day. She didn't need to officialize that with a marriage certificate or have a bunch of children to divide it to. And she's an icon, she's a luminary, she's a catalyst for change. There's a lot more as a woman that you can contribute to society other than motherhood. And this is a hard concept to grasp for a lot of men, because they're used to the women's role traditionally in the kitchen, in the kids' bedroom, and that's not what progress looks like. We've had it for so long, this model, that it became so toxic. It was so imposing on women. This is the only thing that you're allowed to do. And the focus from quantity has shifted to quality now in this day and age, because in the past, since life was so hard, let's say mortality rate was high, it was expected to have an X number of children. If one passes, you have the other ones to care for in your older age. Now, we are shifting to quality. So yes, we have to provide a basic food, clothing, shelter, but also education and a decent standard of living, which in the past, it wasn't even a concept, and especially for women who had to basically follow a preset model of subservience. That is no longer the case in a lot of communities, but at the same time, in other communities, it's still the case. And you can see the amount of the amount of progress in that community by the status of the woman, the economic situation, and the social impact. I noticed one peculiar trend. You see conflict zones in the world, and some of them are constant conflict zones. There is a direct correlation between a very high birth rate in that area and very high death rate. Why? Because the focus is not on quality of the people. Just bring people in, pour people out, make new kids, no education, no birth control. And then, first of all, they struggle materially. It's difficult to cover the daily food necessities. And then they start fighting for lack of other, something to do in their life. No jobs, no perspective, no economy to speak of. The only thing is fighting. We want to get away from this kind of model, and the best way to do that is by empowering women.
Welcome to the world of pre-seed funding, the initial phase of venture financing where entrepreneurs kickstart their startup journey. Pre-seed funding marks the beginning of the seed funding process, where entrepreneurs use their own resources to develop and grow their startup while seeking guidance and assessing viability. The primary aim is to assemble a team and create a minimum viable product, MVP, to showcase the product's potential and attract additional investment rounds. Startups at this stage typically have a valuation range of $10,000 to $100,000. Many entrepreneurs seek guidance from experienced founders to help them determine funding needs, create a successful business model, and gain insight into developing their plan into a functioning business. It's important to note that success is not guaranteed, and various risk factors must be taken into account when investing one's own resources into a startup. Pre-seed funding sets the stage for the exciting journey of turning an idea into a thriving business, but it's essential to navigate the challenges with careful planning and guidance.
Well, I love that. My goodness. And I love those three areas that you spoke about, that without education, education first, for women, and that being something that should be, free for all. Everybody should be free to be educated and should be educated. And I love what you talked about when you said ownership of finances. And if we don't take ownership of the finances, then that particular culture, that particular area, it falters. That family structure, it falls down. And there's very interesting points you brought out where you talked about how with men that this is onerous on men. This whole thing of they have to carry all the bait, they have to carry the weight of the entire family, especially now when it in many of the advancing cultures and even the cultures in the smaller countries, it has become evident that you have to have two salaries in order to run a family. And so, therefore, with that in mind, and if the woman is there, like you said, taking care of, having more children and taking care of the children, then that becomes more of a burden. And that's why the men are, either they're dying from conflict, from war, or they're dying from just the anxiety and the stresses, that their life is bringing on to them. And I like what you said about the social status, where your education, and that goes back to number one. You paired that very well, Lisa, and that says your education, helps you to determine that social status because you see where you fit in. You have now come out and been educated on what's going on in the world around you outside of your home, outside of the just simple raising of the children and just simply trying to survive, day to day. Now you see the world around you, you're educated about it, and that helps you to say, oh, this is what I can do to raise my education, to raise my social status in my community and in my country. Can you
Yes.
tell us how does this fit in with the storytelling, you know, to transform the people through storytelling? What stories are we telling one another that would
Oh,
that would transform our lives from where we are now, especially when you made mention, you dropped a big nugget on us when you talked about those conflict zones. Well, that's a whole big nugget, another conversation, because you're absolutely right. In the conflict zones, we can see high birth rates and high death rates. It almost makes you wonder if it's just simply by design that they have that to keep it in that conflict zone, and that really in the people who are there in charge, the decision makers, have no intention. It looks like it is their purpose to keep it that way.
there could be a lot of speculation on that. We can go by the end results. We can look at numbers basically. But on the other hand, one can't help but wonder if we just keep making new human beings without regard for meeting their basic needs, physical, emotional, and material. Where is that going to take us? Because it's not that there are not resources, there are plenty, but they are unevenly distributed. So what are we going to do? People have been fighting for resources for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So there has to be some sort of a check and balance. And I'm not sure if it's by design, by people, or by a higher power to kind of keep populations in check as far as numbers, And it's sad that it is like that, but it is because the focus had been on quantity, not quality. Why would you want to create more people who are scraping for a living, more beggars, more potential criminals, more problems to society, if that community in your own family, in your own personal status cannot and will not provide a decent living for them? It's not that hard. Birth control is not such an astrophysics concept. It's quite simple, but it's not applied because for a number of reasons, social, religious, convenience, habit, whatever you want to call it. But this is a paramount factor of the quality of society, you know and when we talk about storytelling, okay, so back to your question. It's not that I just tell stories. I like to tell real life stories. So let me give you an example. We were talking about women's status, right? Independent, dependent, codependent. Where do you fall in between? And what is your level of comfort and happiness? Okay, me, of course, I'm the alpha personality. I have to be independent. And I've been raised like that. I was in a community and in a country where women were empowered in one way or another. We took care of finances, education level was high. Family, the traditional Romanian family has never been based on numbers. One or two children at the most. Well, other cultures, say for example, Latin America, are not like that. They love to have a numerous family. With us is a bit different. You know, it's by culture really. And I'll give you an example of, you tell me if this is independent, dependent, or codependent. So I was talking to a Hispanic lady. She was very much family oriented. And the structure in that family, she wasn't referring to her own, even though she was quite subservient to her macho man. Let's be honest. But she told me about another acquaintance of her, a woman who was so dependent on her guy that the way to put it was like this: she breathes through his skin. And when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, help us, help, help our souls. Breathe
Mhm.
through his skin, really now. So how much power do you think that woman has? How much
Zero.
decision making?
Has
Zero.
has zero, and I have heard that before, and the cultures really dominate almost into the fabric, become the fabric of their lives. And so even when you pull women out and away from that type of an environment, then what happens is, because they've been so inundated in that, they then will cling to wherever they're pulled out into. They won't make that decision. They won't, it is so ingrained in their structure. I have hired, that's a very good point that you make, Lisa, because I have hired people from various cultures, and that comes with them. Although they've stepped out, they've gotten educated, and they seem to be, independent, can stand on their own, they will not make decisions. They will not be the first ones. They will not be the one to speak up or speak out, no matter, what's going on or what's happening or how much you say. You have the power. You are now, the supervisor. You're now the manager. You're the director. And yet they will still come to the table as though that man or that culture is right there with them. So yeah, breaking that generational curse on on a society is something that we definitely and I'm glad to see that you're trying to attack that, but that's something we definitely have to also break at the same time.
And it's not an easy process. At the same time, realize that this has to be somewhat gradual. It's like people who try to quit drugs or alcohol. Try to go cold turkey suddenly is not going to work. You have to create a frame of functioning. How are you going to gradually transition to a different state? Even for the most progressive men who want to support women in leadership and they're passionate about their success, and thankfully we have a good number of them and it's a growing number globally. Even for them, this is something not necessarily within their comfort zone, because when you've been told for generations that you are better because you are stronger, that because you're the superior gender, because you can do anything and women are lesser, it's not easy to make the switch in their mind that this has been a big perpetrated lie just to keep men fighting. And we can talk about that in another show. But think about the convenience of the current the social status, the status quo. Because yeah, a man comes from work and he likes to have a bowl of a hot soup on the table. Nothing wrong with that. This is little comfort. It's something to enjoy life. But if that's all she does, and this Hispanic lady I made reference to earlier, that's all she did every single day. That was her whole day, was organized around preparing meals for her working husband. She was not allowed to have a job. When she got married, she had to quit high school. I guess because she came from that kind of macho culture, her dad was not much help either. So once she got married, she quit high school. And then once she got pregnant, she quit the job because that was her agreement with the husband. So once you become a mother, you quit the job. And she has never gone back to work ever since. Even though the kids were well grown up and jobs and whatever, she was still not allowed to move outside of the kitchen and bedroom and living room area. And it was a sad story because even though she put on a brave face and she smiled and she said, "This is how it is," I could tell that in her heart of hearts, she was aching. She was depressed. She was revolted by this whole thing, but she couldn't even express it. Sometimes she would take it on her kids. She would have those temper tantrums and stuff like that. And her husband would tolerate those because it came with the territory. Let her vent because that's the only thing she has, just run her big mouth. And then at the end of the day, he's still the one making the decisions. And I was saddened by this whole situation because I grew up in a completely different environment. And one thing that I think it became evident at some point, because that was their traditional value, machismo, everything around revolving around the man, they had trouble assimilating my kind of background. And I'm all about diversity. We all have diverse customs, and I'm not going to be here to attack your custom or to defend my custom. Let's meet in the middle and learn about each other. But they became really uncomfortable with my level of independence. Like, why is she not conforming to this model, to our model? Because that's not how it is. I will never become someone else that I'm not. Okay, so I'm gonna flush down the drain decades of investments in my education just to do what? To change diapers? I'm like, no, that is a nightmare scene. I don't even want to think about it. So that's just an example. But these are real life stories.
Are you a new business looking for venture capital funding? Let's talk about Series A financing and what it entails. Series A financing is the first round of investment for startups. At this stage, businesses must have a developed product, consistent revenue flow, and a plan for long-term profits. The typical capital raised in a Series A funding round is between $1 million and $15 million, with an average of $13 million. Startups at this stage typically have a valuation range of $10 million to $30 million. Securing Series A. Funding can be challenging, as it requires establishing a valuation that considers the company's value and prior investments. However, it provides investors with the opportunity to invest in a promising business, benefiting both the company and its future stockholders. Series A financing is a crucial stage for startups, offering the opportunity for growth and development. If you're considering this funding route, ensure your business is well prepared for the journey ahead.
Think about the trailblazer, Queen Elizabeth I. I watched the movie with Kate Blanchett, brilliant acting, by the way. So in the 1600s, no such thing as queens, more like kings, and queens were there on the side, the sidekicks. And she was the one to say, hey, this is how, the bull stops here. I'm going to be the queen. I'm going to be no man's Elizabeth, and I'm going to rule as I see fit. Now, what is with this woman? She was educated, okay? She came from an aristocratic family. She had ownership of finances. And then, by choice and by design, she decided not to be a mother. Because, like it or not, there's nothing wrong with motherhood, but at some point, it does conflict with a woman's dream for a higher education, for a career, and for a meaningful contribution to society. You can do a lot more to society than just contribute new numbers of people. As a woman, I'm talking as a woman from a reproductive standpoint. Think about all the inventions, all the contributions, all the marvelous things that could not happen because you are giving, you are handing your body and your life over to another human being. Now, when it did happen, assuming in the cases where men did not take credit for women's inventions, because that was also the case, there was no frame to allow women to claim ownership of their inventions. For example, I was reading a thing on Google. Planet Pluto was actually named by a teenage girl, but because she was a girl, she was a woman. Like that was beginning of the 20th century. the credit went to a friend of her father's who was a university professor. And I'm like, if this is how things work, then this is why we've been in trouble for so long. You know, another invention like the bulletproof vest and the median line on a street, you know, that white divider that keeps the lane divided.
Yes.
Those were inventions by women, and there's a long list of inventions by women who that have a common trend of safety. Women invent things with a safety factor in mind, you know. So it's very interesting. This comes from a place of comfort, of nurturing. And then you have a dude, Kalashnikov, for example. He invented that beautifully designed rifle, and then on his deathbed, he regretted his invention because he realized how many people met their demise because of his invention. So that's just an example. You want to aim for tonic femininity that is a balance to too long-running toxic masculinity. There's nothing wrong with masculinity in itself. You don't have to question it, like gender-wise or whatever, but just be careful with the toxic side, because this is the one that was empowered, that made decisions, because this kind of dudes, they crave power, and whatever they decide is to the detriment of others. So when women step in with the nurturing, with the caring, with the loving nature that they are naturally endowed with, it's not going to be a big fire or explosion or conflict. It's going to be a gradual transition to, first of all, common sense. And then we're going to see progress in all aspects of society, education and shelter and food and, you know, an improvement overall.
Okay. Well, that you heard it here first. That's the last word on it. I want to thank everyone. And I want to thank my guest, Lisa Kirkwood. She has put it in perspective. I want you to listen to this, because this young woman, she brought to us a framework for what we need to do going forward in the future, what has been done, why we are here where we are, and she gave you some very key points as to this conflict, chaotic society that we seem to find ourselves in. And we seem to find ourselves in this room again and again, and she defined it very well why that is. So I want you to really pay attention to that, and pay attention to her 3 points that she brought out, and that is education, ownership of finance, and social status. Educate yourself first, own your finance, lift your social status. This is Yvonne Gamble, your host of FYNB Talks, and I will see you at the next show.
Financing your next $1 billion? Contact us to be a guest. Join us for the next show.